Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the week 11 of the Oregon Free Methodist Church Free Methodist Experience. This week, we're going to look at Methodism coming to America, the birth of the Free Methodist Church, and holiness and social justice, and how those two things relate. So, let's start with how Methodism came to America. This is a wonderful map of the U.S. in the year 2000. The darker the green, the higher the percentage of Methodists in America. So you can see the East Coast has a much heavier percentage of Methodists, especially if you go into the Midwestern states around Nebraska, Oklahoma. There's a lot of Methodists, and that's understandable when you know the history of Methodism in America. So, early American Methodism, here we go. So it was brought to the US by Irish immigrants, influenced by the Wesleyan revival in the Limerick area in the late 1760s. And it looked to the Anglican Church in America to provide its sacraments, just as in England. So remember, at this point, the Church of England and Methodism have not separated from one another. All Methodists go to Sunday worship at the church, and then they have their class meeting during the week, they have their band meeting during the week, their society meeting during the week. But it is still the Anglican Church, Church of England, where they get their sacraments. Now, there's a crisis, though, as the War of Independence hits in America, because after the War of Independence, Britain surrenders, and all the Church of England clergy go back to England as part of that. And the Episcopal Church, which is the successor, was not yet formed. This meant there were no churches for that Sunday worship part that the Methodists had been relying on. Now, Wesley desperately tries to get someone in England to go out to America, someone who is ordained, but when that is refused, he himself ordains Dr. Thomas Cook. Yes, it's spelled Coke, but it's spelled Cook for the task. Now, that is very controversial. To ordain someone, you have to be a bishop. Wesley is not a bishop. And his brother doesn't like that, as we'll get to in a little bit. But Methodism overcomes Cook and Wesley, and they start off American Methodism. The Christmas Conference, it's called. Happened in 1784 over Christmas, and it accepted the Articles of Religion adapted by Wesley from the 39 Articles of the Church of England. Many of those articles adapted by Wesley are what you find in the discipline today. Some of them have been tweaked and changed. Some of them are exactly as Wesley worded them even to today. So our chapter 1, our Constitution, is based off Wesley's work on the 39 Articles of the Church of England, which are also the 39 Articles you will find in the Episcopal Church in the United States. That first conference saw the election and ordination of Francis Asbury, first a deacon, then elder, then bishop, in 3 successive days. Now, Wesley will fall out with Cook and Asbury over the title bishop. We still use that title in Free Methodism today. But here's what Wesley had to say about Cook and Asbury eventually taking the title bishop. Wesley wanted them to be superintendent, and called general superintendent. If you remember, when we went back to our week looking at how the church is structured, the conference itself takes the place of bishop. So giving an individual the title bishop doesn't work. So here's Wesley's words on it. But in one point, my dear brother, I'm afraid that both the Dr. Cook and you differ from me. I study to be little. You study to be great. I creep. You strut along. I found a school. You a college. Asbury Theological College. Nay, and call it after your own names. One instance of this, of your greatness, has given me great concern. How can you? How dare you suffer yourself to be called bishop? I shudder. I start at the very thought. Men may call me a knave or a fool, a radical, a rascal, a scoundrel, and I am content, but they shall never, by my consent, call me bishop. For my sake, for God's sake, for Christ's sake, put a full end to this. Wow, powerful words from Wesley there. So American Methodism falls out with Wesley over this idea of having bishops in charge of the conference, because the conference was supposed to fulfill the role of a bishop. Now, so what form did this early American Methodism take? Well, it was very Wesleyan in flavor: salvation for all, assurance, and it had a mature doctrine of entire sanctification. It accepted all of Wesley's general rules for Methodist societies that the societies back in England were following, especially the simplicity of holy living, with special attention paid to the rules on superfluous adornments. This still was very strong well into the 20th century Methodism, including Free Methodism. Free Methodists back in the early 20th century did not wear wedding rings. Wedding rings were superfluous adornment. You had spent money on something you didn't like. Methodism was very anti-commercialism. You lived a simple, basic life. You see it in Wesley's teachings on money. Earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. The simplicity of holy living especially came out of the save all you can. Spend as little as you can so that you have more to give away. The less you spend on yourself, the more there is to give to others. Early Methodism would disown all members who did not completely denounce alcohol. And they came out very strongly against slavery at the Christmas conference, saying that they would take immediately some effectual method to extirpate the abomination from among us. That's where it started. Over the coming decades, the American Methodism had lots of ups and downs. So on the high end, it grew at an exponential rate, especially during the push west. Itinerant ministers meant that the church could follow where the population went. This is why itinerancy became such an important factor of American Methodism and then later Free Methodism. You saw those states in the middle, Nebraska, Oklahoma, with a high percentage of Methodists. The short version is we got there first. And got to be the dominant church because we got there first. As the people moved west, so itinerancy allowed people to move west as America moved into the Midwestern states. American Methodism would also be hugely involved with the Second Great Awakening, giving it a flavor of Arminianism, that all can be saved, and a flavor of social justice. Now, it also had some lows. It quickly lost its strength on slavery. Just 6 months after the Christmas conference, that wonderful stance against slavery was softened. Eventually, the Methodist Episcopal Church would split into the Methodist Episcopal Church North and the Methodist Episcopal Church South over the issue of slaveholding. Other offshoots would splinter from it, especially over the issue of slavery, and these include the Wesleyans, the Nazarenes, the Free Methodists. During that time, also, the emphasis on the pursuit of holiness, the pursuit of perfection, perfect love, declines over that period. And the church begins to move away from practices of holiness. And it's into that situation, a church that had lost its stance on slavery, a church that had stepped away from pursuing holiness, that a guy by the name of B.T. Roberts steps in, Benjamin Titus Roberts. And he's up in upstate New York. And he was critical of something called the Buffalo Regency. These were the ecclesial authorities of the Episcopal Methodist Church in the area. So basically, they are the conference bigwigs for the conference that covers upstate New York. and he critiques them. And these were some of the critiques, and he puts them down in writings, attacking what he calls New School Methodism, a Methodism that has moved away from what Methodism should be. His critiques include combining regeneration and sanctification into one experience, so forgetting the pursuit of perfection, distrusting Christian experience, displacing class meetings and love feasts with parties. So instead of having fellowship events where discipleship is important and sharing in love is important, and instead having parties that are just about fun, not fellowship and discipleship and growth. Whew, I apologize for my yawning. I'm recording this at 5 in the morning while I'm waiting for a turkey to cook. Random side note. So displacing class meetings and love feasts with parties. 4. Building elaborate churches and renting out pews. Rather than having simple meeting places where everybody can come, they were building expensive, elaborate churches that cost a lot of money, and then to pay for them, renting out pews to the wealthy, to the point that if the family didn't show up who rented the pew, it was still their pew. So all the poor people would be left standing at the back while there were empty pews in the seats. Encouraging adornment of gold and costly apparel, and then support of slavery. These were his critiques of the Buffalo Regency, of the conference bigwigs in the conference where B.T. Roberts was in New York. So B.T. Roberts eventually gets kicked out, really quite rudely. His followers were continually sidelined and rejected. They openly state that they will not think of leaving the church, but they eventually get expelled after the 1860 General Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church North. There was very little in the way of appeal that was done fairly. A lot of B.T. Roberts' followers were lay people, and at the time the Methodist Episcopal Church was all just ordained. The church conference, was all ordained. So the people trying B.T. Roberts and testing him were all ordained, but he had a lot of lay support, but there were no lay votes. This is why the Free Methodist Church today, 1, has Chapter 7 of the Discipline, which details the rights of elders in situations where they're being accused of things, gives due process. And 2 is why we have equal ordain and lay representation. So that comes out of this ugly mess. But B.T. Roberts and his followers get expelled, and a convention is held at Pekin on August the 23rd, 1860, to form the Free Methodist Church on the basis of doctrines and practices of early Methodism are restored, not the New School Methodism that B.T. Roberts had been attacking, but early Methodism, the Methodism of the Christmas Conference, the Methodism that cared about entire sanctification, the Methodism that cared about fighting slavery, the Methodism that cared about the pursuit of holiness. It had equal representation of lay and ordained people. There would be no slaveholding, and also no connection with secret or oath-bound societies. Many members of the Methodist Church at that time had become members of groups like the Masons and the Odd Fellows and all that. And the Free Methodists were secret societies, have no place in a faith that is all about openness and vulnerability and humility, and bringing things into the light. When you read chapter 3 of the Discipline, you will understand a little more on kind of our phrasing. So you cannot be a member of the Free Methodist Church, even today. You cannot be a member of the Free Methodist Church and be a member of a secret society such as the Freemasons. And it's at that point in 1860 in Pekin on August the 23rd, the Free Methodist Church is born. A group of people who never wanted to split. They wanted to just simply call the Methodist Episcopal Church back to what it was set up to be. and they got kicked out for it. So you can understand Free Methodism really as a movement of Methodist renewal. The Methodist Episcopal Church had become stale. It had stepped away from what it stood for. And the Free Methodists were about returning to what Methodism stood for. So at the Christmas conference, when Methodism came to America and was formed, you had the witness of the Spirit, entire sanctification, free seats, simplicity in worship and life, and no slaveholding. By the 1850s, there had been a loss of Wesleyan theology. Pews were being rented, ornate churches and ornate church members, clergy owned slaves, and members were in secret societies. And then Free Methodism brought back witness of the Spirit, brought back entire sanctification, free seats, simplicity in worship and life, no slaveholding, and banned secret societies. Notice the similarity here. Free Methodism was at its heart a renewal movement, a renewal of Methodist ideas, Methodist thinking, Methodist ways. And you'll notice that in that formation, in that renewal, abolition, social justice, holiness, sanctification, the pursuit of holiness is very present. And this is where I get to talk to you about the social justice focus of the Free Methodist Church. Because slavery was such a big part of what formed the Free Methodist Church, it forms us today, and social justice issues are a huge part of displaying holiness, displaying perfection, displaying love in the world. If you ever get a chance to read it, I recommend you read this book, Discovering an Evangelical Heritage by Donald W. Dayton. Alas, it is out of print, but if you can find it on Amazon, it is an amazing book. And you will read this and understand that evangelicalism was all about social justice. It was founded in social justice, it kept going through social justice, and somewhere along the way in the 20th century it forgot that. But at its heart, evangelicalism at the 1800s, and even very early 1900s was all about social justice, and we keep that emphasis to today. But I do recommend this book, Discovering an Evangelical Heritage, Donald W. Dayton. So I want to talk for a little while about the social holiness of Wesley, as he founded the Methodist movement. It's to him we look for some guidance on this. So Wesley would say that holiness, Christian perfection, perfect love, is all about love for others. It is about our disposition towards other people, putting other people before ourselves. So he would say this phrase, the only holiness is social holiness. There is no form of holiness you can take which is you isolated in a cave. There is piety, there is devotion, but there is not holiness. Holiness is about love. Love implies another party. Love implies someone else. So the only way you can show holiness is to be in relationship with someone else. The only holiness is social holiness. Wesley also held very strongly to the idea of the transformation of society through the transformation of individuals. Rather than climb to the top and convince the government and change the whole system from the top down, Wesley cared more about showing Jesus to the people at the bottom and having change happen from the grassroots through Jesus impacting the lives of individuals. Social justice actions in Wesley's thinking are therefore actions of Christian love done to display God's love. Social justice actions are examples of social holiness. Social justice actions are individuals working to transform society together. A good example of this is abstinence from alcohol. It didn't actually originally, in the Methodist movement, have anything to do with being the drink of the devil or inherently evil. Wesley was busy feeding the poor. Feeding the poor, social justice, holiness, social holiness, transformation of society through the transformation of individuals. And he got angry that grain for bread was being diverted to make high proof liquors for the rich. So the Methodists said, "We will not drink. We will not add to that demand. We will keep the demand low on these high proof liquors, these whiskeys and bourbons. And instead, we will use the grain that is saved to make bread for the poor." A social justice concern. Wesley's social holiness is so effective that it has been credited with preventing a revolution of the poor, such as happened in France in the late 1700s. Do not underestimate the sheer amount of social work early Methodists did in England and the impact it had upon British society. Historians think that the impact was large enough that it caused the poor people to be okay, to feel loved and cared for enough that they felt they did not need to rebel as they had done in France. Transformation of society through the transformation. And abolition became the focus of a social holiness in America. So as we move from the British context of early Methodism into American Methodism, abolition became a huge social focus. In England, the slave trade ended in the British Empire in 1807, led by Wilberforce and evangelical Anglicans. Remember, in England at this point, Methodism and the Anglican Church haven't separated, and there's a very big wing of the evangelical Anglicans in the Church of England. Even where they're not necessarily Wesleyan Methodists, they certainly had a lot in common. So the slave trade ends by Wilberforce and evangelical Anglicans. In America, the Methodist Church will divide into North and South over the issue. Wesleyan Methodists will split off in support of abolition in 1847, the first denomination to be formed purely on a social justice issue. Nazarenes and Free Methodists will follow later on this issue. Many Methodists grab a hold of the abolition issue during the Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening was phenomenal for how, in the northern states, how strongly it picked up abolition. It's a phenomenal uptaking of the cause. Now, the debate among Methodists was not always for or against abolition, but often gradual or immediate abolition. Very few Methodists were for in the Methodist Episcopal Church North. In the Methodist Episcopal Church North, the fight was often, in states like Pennsylvania, there were often big fights of should we just abolish slavery outright in one quick go, or should we gradually phase it out to lessen the economic impact. Ultimately, America under Lincoln after the Civil War will choose the immediate abolition, upsetting not just those who were for slavery, but also upsetting those who thought a gradual removal of slavery would be for the best. Social justice is still important today to the Free Methodist Church, to many Methodist groups. It's so in our DNA. If you do not care about social justice, you'll struggle. Okay, understand that of the 9 sacred pathways, activist is low down for me. I'm not a huge social justice warrior, but for me, it is important to be part of a family that does social justice. It is important for me to advocate on social justice issues. Understand? If you think social justice is a waste of time, Free Methodism is not for you. Even if you're not an out-and-out social justice person, you've got at least recognize that it is important for the church as a whole to be doing. Otherwise, you will really struggle in Free Methodism. So it is still a vital part of Wesleyan denominations around the world. Within the Free Methodist Church, here's a few things we have. We have the Set Free movement, which fights slavery. We are one of the best denominations at fighting slavery around the world. And we brag on that. We have worked in the Indian General Conference has become amazing at this. Slavery is a huge issue in India. In America, it comes in the form of sex slavery. We fight sex slavery in the US today. We were fighting it before it was cool in the Portland area to fight slavery. I know there's a whole lot in Portland where sex slavery was kind of, especially 4 or 5 years ago, sex slavery was kind of the fad to fight in Portland for a lot of churches. They would say they were fighting it, but not really do much. We have been proactively fighting sex slavery in the U.S. way before it was cool. Eden Project, a project to plant trees and bring social climate justice. We have Seed, sustainable enterprise through economic development. Ways of creating micro enterprise that make sense for people in their area so that people in these impoverished countries can develop an income and an economy. Yeah. We have ICCM, that's about rescuing children in need around the world. We have some of our churches in the Oregon Conference. Sanctuary Free Methodist Church in Gresham has a huge food bank. Mountain Gospel Fellowship in Falls City does a produce giveaway on Fridays. There's stuff happening all over the conference, the denomination. Social justice is a huge part of who we are. And it provides integrity to our mission. Ultimately, social justice is the culmination of our theology of holiness. Love others. It is gospel freedom put into action. 1 John 4:19, Luke 4, Colossians 1:27. And we distinguish little between evangelism and social justice. To do social justice in the Free Methodist Church is to bring a foretaste of the kingdom of God. It is to show the kingdom to people, introduce them to Jesus. It is evangelical at its heart. Social justice cannot be separated from evangelism. The two are not different. The two are welded together inseparably. So even if you're not a giant activist type, I'm not a giant activist type, you had still better care about social justice and understand that it is important to who we are and what we need to do in Christ if you're going to be part of the Free Methodist Church. So assignments this week. You're reading Discipline. Discipline chapters 3 and 7. Chapter 3 is our living standards. You'll see a lot of our social justice conscience coming out in there. Chapter 7 is church order. What happens when things go wrong, when a pastor goes wrong, when a church goes wrong. A lot of that comes out of that fight around the formation of the Free Methodist Church in 1860. A couple of readings for you, both PDFs on the class site. Chapters 8 through 10, From Age to Age, A Living Witness. Those tell you the story of Methodism, earlier Methodism in America. And then chapters 1 and 2, From a Future with a History, will summarize for you a lot of the events surrounding the formation of the Free Methodist Church. Then here are your discussion questions. Number 1, whilst we have a denominational emphasis upon the social issue of slavery, what are the social justice issues in your local congregation community? How might your church help? I challenge you with this question to think outside the box. Don't go with the easy and acceptable answers such as feeding the hungry. What are the issues in your context? Are you in an area where gentrification is the issue? Where generational poverty is the issue? Sex slavery or teen pregnancy? What is something your community is crying out for on a social justice front that isn't one of those obvious, easy go-to ones like food? 2, after preaching a series on social justice issues today, you meet with one of your congregation. They accuse you, not aggressively, but still with feeling, of bringing too much politics into the church and not fully preaching the word during that series. They remind you that we follow the word of God and not a social gospel. How will you work with them? So those are your questions this week. Have a great time. I will see you online. Bye.